She married the man who promised her forever, but one night, forever turned into a nightmare. He looked at her with cold eyes and said the unthinkable. He wanted her to please his friends to prove her loyalty. Her heart froze. The man who once called her his world now treated her like nothing more than a toy. When she refused, his rage filled the room. Glass shattered, fear echoed, and love died that night. But what he didn't know was that the woman he tried to destroy would one day return stronger, fearless, and untouchable. Before we dive into today's story, tell me in the comments, where are you watching me from? The morning sun rose slowly over the quiet corner of the city, brushing golden light across the narrow street, where a small coffee shop came alive with warmth and music. The sign above the door read Golden Bean, and inside, the soft scent of roasted beans mixed with vanilla and fresh bread. Behind the counter, Emily Carter moved with gentle grace, a young woman with golden hair that shimmered like morning sunlight and eyes the color of the sea after rain. She wasn't just serving coffee, she was serving fragments of peace to a world always in a hurry. Her hands were steady, her smile faint but kind. Each morning she wiped the counter, turned up the soft jazz music, and whispered to herself, "Another day, another dream." She had been running the Golden Bean alone for 3 years, ever since her parents passed. It wasn't a big cafe, just 10 wooden tables, an espresso machine that coughed before it worked, and the old gramophone she refused to replace. But to Emily, it was her safe place, a small world she could control in a city that often felt too cruel. Her routine never changed, until he walked in. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning. The bell above the door rang softly, and a man entered, tall, sharply dressed, with an air that silenced the room without effort. His presence was cold, yet magnetic. His watch shimmered, his shoes shone, and his confidence was almost dangerous. He didn't look like someone who drank coffee at small places like this, but he walked to the counter anyway. "Black, no sugar," he said, his voice deep, calm, but commanding. Emily looked up, startled by his tone. "Coming right up," she replied, her voice almost a whisper. When she placed the cup before him, their eyes met, and in that second, the air between them shifted. His stare wasn't ordinary, it was heavy, searching, as if he was trying to read her secrets. He took a sip, nodded slightly, and smiled, not warmly, but in a way that left her uneasy. "Perfect," he said. "I'll be back tomorrow." And he was. Every morning after that, the same thing, 9 a.m., a black coffee, the same seat near the window, and the same silence that followed him. He rarely spoke, but when he did, Emily felt it. His words lingered like smoke in the air. Days turned into weeks. She began to expect him, though she wouldn't admit it. Some mornings, she'd glance at the clock and catch herself smiling. She didn't even know his name yet, but something about him unsettled and intrigued her. One rainy afternoon, when the cafe was nearly empty, he finally broke the silence. "You make this place feel like it doesn't belong to the city," he said, watching raindrops trace the glass. Emily chuckled softly. "That's the idea. The world outside is too loud." He tilted his head slightly, studying her. "You like quiet things?" "I like peace," she answered. "It's rare." He smiled again, that mysterious, unreadable smile. "Peace is overrated," he murmured. She didn't know what to say to that. There was something in his eyes, darkness or maybe sadness, that made her want to ask more, but she didn't. The next day, she found a small envelope under his coffee cup. It held a single note: "Dinner, tomorrow night, 8 p.m., say yes." Below it was his name, Lucas White. Emily froze for a moment. No one had ever spoken to her like that, not asking, but deciding. Yet something inside her stirred, a quiet curiosity mixed with danger. That evening, she locked up early and sat at one of her own tables, staring at the note. The name Lucas White felt familiar. She had read about him somewhere. A self-made millionaire, owner of multiple companies, always in the news, but never with a smile. A man with rumors surrounding his wealth and whispers around his heart. She told herself he wouldn't go. But the next night, she found herself standing outside the restaurant he'd written down. It wasn't the kind of place she usually went. Marble floors, candlelight, and silence heavy, with luxury. Lucas was already there, waiting, dressed in black. When he saw her, his expression softened. For the first time. "You came," he said. "I wasn't sure I should," Emily confessed. "I was sure you would." The evening passed in a blur of conversation and glances. He was charming, witty, almost gentle, but every now and then, a flicker of something darker crossed his face, something hidden behind his calm smile. He asked about her life, her dreams, her losses. He listened in a way no one ever had. When she spoke of her parents, his gaze softened. "You must have learned to be strong very young," he said quietly. She nodded. "Sometimes strength isn't a choice." For a long moment they just looked at each other, and for the first time in years, Emily felt seen, completely seen. After dinner, he walked her to her car. The city lights danced on wet pavement, and she could feel his presence like static in the air. "I'll see you tomorrow," he said, holding her gaze. "I work early," she murmured. "Then I'll come early." The next morning, he did, and the morning after that. It became their rhythm. Quiet mornings filled with small talk and unspoken emotions. The way he looked at her made her heartbeat stumble, made the world blur. There was something in him that pulled her in, a loneliness that mirrored her own. Sometimes he'd sit silently, just watching her move behind the counter. Other times, he'd tell her fragments of his past, pieces that didn't fit, like he was hiding the truth between lines. Emily didn't know what he wanted from her, but she couldn't deny that his presence made her feel alive again, even if it scared her. One evening, as she was closing the shop, Lucas stayed behind. The air was quiet, golden from the last light of day. He walked up to her slowly, his steps deliberate, eyes unreadable. "You shouldn't be here this late, see," he said softly, pretending not to tremble. He smiled faintly. "Maybe I like the quiet too now." For a moment they stood there, the sound of the clock ticking between them. He reached out, brushed a strand of hair from her face, a gentle touch that carried unspoken intent. Emily's breath caught. She didn't step back. He leaned closer, his voice low, dangerous, and tender all at once. "Do you believe in fate, Emily?" She swallowed hard. I don't know." His lips curved into a faint smile. "Then maybe I'll have to make you believe." The room felt smaller, the air heavier. His nearness was intoxicating, not soft like romance, but powerful, almost consuming. And in that moment, Emily didn't know whether to fear him or trust him. He turned toward the door, pausing at the threshold. The light caught his face, beautiful and unreadable, like the calm before a storm. As Lucas left her shop that evening, his voice drifted back to her, quiet, steady, but laced with something haunting. "Soon, Emily. You'll be mine forever." His tone was both romantic and chilling. The words he left behind that night, "Soon, Emily. You'll be mine forever," kept echoing in her head long after the shop lights went out. For days she told herself it was only a flirtatious promise, nothing more, yet the tone of it clung to her skin like perfume she couldn't wash away. Lucas kept his word. He arrived every morning, always on time, always bringing a little more of his world with him. The silver car that hummed like quiet thunder, the phone calls that stopped when he crossed her doorway, the faint scent of expensive cologne that lingered even after he'd gone. Soon he was no longer a customer, but a rhythm. He began helping her close the shop, walking her home, buying dinner for two even when she said she'd already eaten. Each evening he learned a little more about her. Her favorite song, her fear of storms, the story behind the scar on her wrist from when she was a child. And each time he listened, she felt herself slipping further into the warmth of his attention. When Lucas smiled, the whole room seemed to belong to him. He spoke softly but with certainty. His compliments were precise, like they had been weighed before leaving his mouth. He never raised his voice, never rushed. Everything about him felt deliberate, designed to make her feel chosen. Within weeks, he had rewritten the map of her days. A black car waited outside the cafe one morning. A driver stepped out, saying, "Mr. White thought you might like a more comfortable way to get home." Another day, a small box arrived, velvet and heavy. Inside lay a delicate bracelet studded with tiny diamonds. She tried to refuse, but Lucas only said, "You wear light beautifully, Emily. Don't dim it." He took her to restaurants where the tables were marble and the conversations hushed. They talked beneath chandeliers, and though she told herself she didn't belong in places like that, he would take her hand and whisper, "You belong anywhere I do." Weekends turned into escapes, long drives to distant coasts, private gardens, penthouse balconies with the city glittering below. The more he gave, the more she forgot to ask why. For the first time since her parents' passing, she laughed without holding back. When Lucas looked at her, she felt like the only woman in a world built of glass and gold. Then came the night on the rooftop hotel. The city lights swirled beneath them like falling stars. Music drifted from somewhere far away. He took her hand, eyes reflecting the skyline. "Emily," he said, voice softer than she'd ever heard. "You've made me remember what peace feels like." Before she could answer, he reached into his coat and brought out a ring. It caught the glow of 1,000 lights, a small universe trapped in silver. Her heart froze. "Lucas, we've only known each other for a few months." He stepped closer, cutting off the space between them. "When you know," he said. "And I know I can't imagine a world without you." Something inside her whispered caution, yet another voice, lonely, longing, whispered louder. Tears stung her eyes. She nodded. He slipped the ring onto her finger. Applause rose from the waiters who'd been waiting in silence. Emily laughed through her tears, believing this was what forever was supposed to feel like. But when she looked back at him, his smile had shifted. The warmth in it had cooled into something firm, almost possessive. He drew her closer, kissed her forehead, and murmured, "No more hiding behind counters and coffee cups. From now on, you're the center of everything." The following morning, she woke in his apartment overlooking the river. Her phone buzzed with messages from her staff, but Lucas took it gently from her hand. "You don't need to worry about the shop anymore," he said. "I've arranged for someone to run it." Emily frowned. "But that cafe is my life." "It was your life," he corrected, pouring coffee into a porcelain cup. "Now we build a new one." She tried to laugh it off, yet something inside her ached. When she mentioned visiting her friend Lily that afternoon, he hesitated. "You don't need friends who remind you of small lives. They'll only pull you back." The days that followed were wrapped in velvet comfort and invisible chains. He filled her world with gifts, but each one seemed to take something small from her. A choice, a voice, a habit. The keys to her own apartment vanished. Her phone number changed. He said it was for her safety. "People might bother you now that they know who you're with." When she spoke of reopening the cafe, he kissed her forehead and said, "Later." When she mentioned missing her evening walks, he sent guards to accompany her. Love was supposed to make her feel free. Instead, she began to measure her days by the things she could no longer do. And yet, each time she looked into his eyes, she saw flashes of the man who had once made her feel safe. That illusion kept her silent. The wedding came quickly, grander than she had imagined. Hundreds of guests she didn't know, photographers flashing, music swelling. Lucas looked perfect beside her, his hand steady, his vows flawless. When he placed the ring on her finger a second time, he leaned close and whispered, "Now the world knows what I've always known. You're mine." The words were soft enough that only she could hear, but they left a cold tremor in her heart. That night the city celebrated their union. Fireworks painted the sky. Inside the penthouse suite, silence replaced the noise. Emily stood by the window, watching the lights fade over the water. Lucas came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her shoulders. His touch was gentle, but his grip was unyielding. "You're shaking," he said. Just tired, she whispered. He kissed the side of her neck, the gesture meant to comfort, yet she felt the air thin around her. He looked at her reflection in the glass, his own eyes dark and unreadable. For the first time, she wondered who he truly was beneath the charm, beneath the wealth, beneath the practiced smile that could light up or freeze a room. The question lingered, unspoken, as she turned toward the bed, trying to quiet the unease growing in her chest. He followed slowly, every movement measured. When she lay down, exhaustion pulled at her. The last thing she saw before sleep took her was his face half hidden in shadow, watching her not with affection, but with ownership. As Emily drifted into dreams, Lucas's voice broke the silence, low, almost tender, yet colder than winter air. Now you belong to me completely. The morning sunlight touched the curtains, painting soft gold streaks across the luxurious bedroom. But the warmth couldn't reach Emily's heart. The silence between her and Lucas had grown heavier with each passing day, as though the air itself carried the weight of something unspoken, something dangerous. It had been just 1 month since their wedding. Ding, yet the sweetness of their vows felt like a distant echo. Lucas no longer greeted her with tender words or lingering glances. Instead, he hid behind business calls, sharp instructions, and that chilling indifference that made Emily's heart ache in confusion. At first, she told herself it was stress, that his empire demanded all his attention. But soon, she realized it wasn't stress that changed him. It was something darker, something deliberate. She watched him at breakfast, his eyes cold as he scrolled through his phone, the clinking of his spoon the only sound in the vast dining room. Emily smiled faintly, hoping to reach the man she once loved. "Lucas, I thought maybe tonight we could—" He cut her off without lifting his gaze. "You'll meet some people this evening. My partners. Be ready." Emily blinked, startled. "Your partners? At home?" He finally looked up, his eyes sharp. "No. At the penthouse. You'll entertain them, keep them happy, smile, that's all I ask." Her breath caught in her throat. "Entertain them?" she repeated, her voice trembling. Lucas leaned back in his chair, sipping his coffee slowly. "You're beautiful, Emily. Use that. It helps business." The words hit her like a slap. She stared at him, disbelief flooding her veins. "Lucas, I'm your wife, not—" The coffee cup shattered as his hand slammed against the table. "Don't argue with me," he thundered. "You're mine, Emily. Everything about you is mine." She flinched, tears welling up in her eyes. The warmth she once knew in him was gone, replaced by a coldness that made her body tremble. She rose slowly, her voice barely a whisper. "I won't do it." Lucas's eyes narrowed. "What did you say?" "I said I won't do it," she cried, her tears breaking free. "I loved you, Lucas. I believed in you, but I won't let you destroy me like this." The room went still. Then his hand swept across the table, sending a wine glass crashing to the marble floor. Red liquid splattered across her white dress like blood. Lucas's jaw tightened. "You'll regret this defiance." Before she could react, he turned away, his tone low and venomous. "Go to the bedroom. Now." Her heart pounded. "Lucas, please, now!" His shout made her legs give way, and she stumbled back toward the hallway. The heavy door slammed behind her, the sound echoing through the mansion like a final verdict. Hours passed. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, knees drawn to her chest, tears streaking her cheeks. Outside, the city lights glittered, indifferent to her pain. She had once thought love meant safety. Now it felt like a cage. Her mind replayed every smile, every promise, every whispered "forever" he had given her, all of it now poisoned by deceit. She pressed her hand against her chest, as though she could still feel the warmth of the man she married. But it was gone. When night fell, Lucas returned. He entered silently, holding a tray with a cup of coffee. His tone was calm, too calm. "You need to rest," he said softly. "Drink this. You'll feel better." She hesitated, her instinct whispering danger, but exhaustion drowned her suspicion. Her hands trembled as she took the cup. The bitter taste of coffee burned her throat, but she forced a small smile, hoping it might melt the ice in his eyes. Lucas said nothing more. He turned and left the room, locking the door behind him. Emily sat in silence, the faint hum of the city outside. Slowly, her eyelids grew heavy. A strange dizziness washed over her. The room began to tilt and blur. Her cup slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. Her last thought before darkness took her was of her cafe. The scent of roasted beans, the laughter of customers, the sunlight in her window. A life that felt like it belonged to someone else now. When she awoke, the morning light felt cruel. Her head throbbed and her body ached as if she had been dragged through shadows. Something felt wrong, deeply wrong. Her coffee, it had tasted strange. She sat up, her hands trembling. The sheets were cold, and her reflection in the mirror showed pale skin and frightened eyes. A deep fear gripped her chest, not from what she remembered, but from what she couldn't. Tears filled her eyes as realization hit her. Lucas had done something. Her trust had been drugged away. Her world, once painted in gold, had turned into ashes overnight. The bedroom door opened suddenly. Lucas stood there, dressed immaculately as always, his expression unreadable. In his hand, he held a folder, sleek, black, and final. Emily's heart raced as he stepped closer. His eyes didn't soften. They hardened like glass. Without a word, he tossed the folder onto the bed. Papers spilled out. Divorce papers. Her breath caught. Lucas, what is this? He didn't blink. Sign it, he said coldly. You're no longer useful to me. Her tears blurred the ink on the page. The world around her seemed to crumble, and for the first time, she saw Lucas not as the man she loved, but as the monster he had always been. Emily stared at the divorce papers with shaking hands, her heart broken, her body weak. Lucas turned to leave, but before walking out, he looked back at her with a faint smirk. Don't think this is the end, he murmured. For you, it's just the beginning. The papers slipped from her trembling hands and fluttered to the marble floor like fallen leaves. Emily's breath came in shallow gasps. Her world, her marriage, her love, her safety, had shattered in a single, merciless sentence. Lucas turned away without a backward glance, his footsteps echoing through the hollow corridors of the mansion. The sound of the door slamming shut behind him was louder than thunder. For a long moment, Emily just stood there. The rain had begun outside, tapping faintly against the glass windows. Then something inside her broke. She moved toward the duo. Slowly at first, then faster, until she was running. Her bare feet slapped against the cold marble floor, the hem of her silk nightdress brushing her ankles. She didn't take a coat. She didn't care. She only knew she had to escape. The door to the outside banged open with a violent gust, and the rain hit her like needles. The cold wind lashed her face, but it was nothing compared to the storm inside her. She ran down the driveway, her golden hair plastered to her face, tears and rain mixing on her skin. The gravel cut her feet, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Behind her, the mansion loomed like a ghost, the place where her dreams had died. She could almost hear his voice, that cruel laughter chasing her through the rain. Don't think this is the end. The words repeated in her mind, sharp and echoing. Her chest ached with every breath. Cars sped past on the wet road, their lights slicing through the storm. Some drivers turned their heads, catching glimpses of the soaked woman stumbling through the night. But no one stopped. The world just kept moving. Emily's heart pounded. Her body trembled. Every step felt heavier than the last. She pressed a hand against her chest, gasping for air, but her tears blurred her vision. Images flashed in her mind. Lucas's first smile at the coffee shop, his promises under candlelight, the warmth of his touch that had turned to chains. Why? She whispered to the rain. Why did you destroy me? No one answered. Only thunder spoke back, rolling through the clouds like a broken heart. Her legs gave way for a moment, and she fell to her knees on the slick pavement. Mud splattered against her skin. Her hands shook violently as she tried to push herself up again, but her body was weak, trembling with cold and exhaustion. She looked up at the night sky. the same sky that once watched her dream of love. God, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Please, I don't want to die like this. Lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the emptiness around her. The city lights shimmered in the distance. So close, yet unreachable. Her mind spun with memories. The smell of roasted beans from her cafe, the warmth of laughter, the sound of her name spoken with love. She had believed in a fairy tale, and it had devoured her. A car horn blared, pulling her from her thoughts. Headlights rushed past, spraying water over her. She stumbled to the side of the road, clutching her arms to her chest. Her lips were pale. Her body shook violently. The rain poured harder. Each drop felt heavier, colder. Her hair clung to her shoulders, golden strands turned to silver by the storm. Her feet ached, cut and raw from the gravel. But still, she walked. One step, then another, as if movement itself might stop her from breaking completely. The streets blurred, the world tilted. Every sound echoed strangely, distant, fading. Her breath came out in short, uneven gasps. She could feel the strength leaving her. She tried to whisper his name one last time, not in love, but in disbelief. Lucas! The syllables dissolved into the rain. She staggered, her vision dimming. Lights danced in her eyes, then vanished. Her knees buckled again. This time, she didn't get up. Her palms hit the ground. Cold water splashed across her face. The scent of wet asphalt filled her lungs. She could barely keep her eyes open. The world spun slowly, beautifully, cruelly. And then, through the blur of tears and storm, she saw it, a shadow moving through the rain. At first she thought it was her mind playing tricks, another hallucination born from heartbreak. But then the figure grew clearer. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with purpose. The wind whipped his coat behind him as he walked toward her. The streetlight caught the glint of his dark hair and the sharpness of his jawline. His eyes, even through the haze, seemed to burn, not with cruelty, not with pity, but something far more dangerous and, strangely protective. Emily blinked, trying to see. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The man knelt beside her, his hand brushing wet strands of hair from her face. His touch was firm but careful, as if he knew she might break with too much force. She tried to speak, but her voice failed. He looked down at her, his gaze steady, filled with something she hadn't seen in a long time. Concern. But beneath that concern was a darkness, an aura that carried the weight of power and sin. Rain dripped from his jaw as he tilted his head slightly. "You're safe now," he said, his voice low, rough, and commanding. Emily's eyelids fluttered. For the first time in weeks, she felt a faint trace of warmth, not from safety, but from the strange energy that surrounded him. As her consciousness faded, she caught one last glimpse of his face, strong, unreadable, dangerous. The storm roared around them, but his eyes never left hers. Before Emily lost consciousness completely, she heard him whisper to someone behind him, a tone that blended authority with menace. "Get the car ready," he said. "She's coming with me." Then darkness swallowed everything. The storm raged like a beast, thunder cracking through the night as rain poured relentlessly over the city. The black car waited by the curb, its headlights slicing through the downpour. Adrian Knight stood over Emily's fragile form, his coat soaked, his hair dripping. His men hovered behind him, uncertain, watching their boss, the man everyone feared, kneel beside a stranger. "Boss," one of them muttered. "She's barely breathing." Adrian glanced up, his jaw tightening. "Then we're wasting time." He scooped her into his arms with a swiftness that defied his size. Emily's body felt weightless, her skin cold as rainwater. Her head rested against his chest, her faint breaths brushing against the fabric of his shirt. "Hospital," he ordered. His voice was low, but carried through the storm like thunder itself. The men rushed to open the car door. Adrian slid in, holding her close as the car sped through the flood. Ed's streets. Each flicker of lightning illuminated his face, sharp, commanding, yet shadowed by something unreadable. He looked down at her as the city lights blurred past. Her golden hair clung to her face, her lips pale. A bruise marred her wrist. He clenched his fist around the site, rage simmering just beneath the surface. "Who did this to you?" he murmured, though she couldn't hear. Emily stirred faintly, her lashes trembling. Her voice was barely a breath. "Please, don't hurt me." Adrian's throat tightened. For a man who had seen war, betrayal, and blood, those 4 words hit him harder than any bullet. "I won't," he whispered, almost to himself. "Not you." The car screeched to a stop at the hospital entrance. Adrian pushed open the door, still holding her. The staff froze as he entered. His name carried weight even here, in a place untouched by the underworld. "Help her," he demanded. His tone wasn't loud, but it left no room for hesitation. The nurses rushed forward, guiding him toward the emergency ward. One of them stammered, "Sir, we'll take her." "No," Adrian interrupted sharply. "I'll stay." They didn't argue. No one argued with Adrian Knight. Inside the white-lit room, doctors worked quickly. Machines beeped. Voices called out medical terms that blurred together. Adrian stood by the door, drenched and silent, his gaze locked on the unconscious woman. A doctor finally approached. "Sir, she's stable for now. Severe dehydration, shock, exhaustion. She'll need rest." The doctor hesitated, then asked, "Who is she to you?" The question hung in the air, heavy with expectation. Adrian didn't flinch. His dark eyes softened for the first time that night. "She's my wife." The words came out calm, deliberate, the kind of lie that sounded like truth. The doctor nodded, scribbling notes without question. "We'll prepare a private room for her." As they wheeled Emily away, Adrian followed closely. He didn't let her out of his sight, not even for a second. Something about her fragility struck him deep, stirring a part of him he thought had long turned to stone. In the quiet of her hospital room, the storm's fury softened into a distant hum. Adrian stood by the window, still in his soaked shirt, watching her chest rise and fall. Her hand lay limp beside her, an IV attached to her wrist. He reached out and gently brushed his thumb over her knuckles. "You're safe now," he whispered. Days passed. The sun returned, painting gold across the white sheets. The nurses learned quickly. No one entered her room without his permission. The guards outside the door stood like shadows, loyal to their silent master. Adrian rarely left her side. He slept in the chair, his head tilted back, his gun resting on the table nearby. Between phone calls and brief meetings, his eyes always returned to her. Sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, he spoke softly to her. Words she couldn't hear, confessions he never gave to anyone else. "I've done terrible things," he murmured one night, his voice low. "But maybe saving you balances one of them." Emily, still unconscious, stirred slightly at the sound of his voice. Her hand twitched, as if reaching toward him. Adrian's gaze softened. "You're strong," he said quietly. "Don't give up now." The rhythm of her breathing steadied. He allowed himself a small sigh of relief. For reasons he couldn't explain, protecting her felt right. Not a business decision, not an order, but something he needed to do. Outside, one of his men entered cautiously. "Boss, there's news about the man who hurt her." Adrian raised a hand, silencing him. "Not now." His eyes didn't leave Emily's face. "She's my priority." Hours turned into days, and the world outside kept spinning. But inside that small, quiet room, something unspoken grew, a fragile connection between 2 broken souls. Emily's color returned slowly. The doctors called it a miracle. Adrian called it willpower. On the 5th morning, sunlight spilled across the room, gentle and warm. Adrian sat beside her, half awake, when he felt movement. Her fingers twitched again, her lips parted slightly. He straightened immediately, leaning closer. "Emily?" Her voice was weak, barely more than a whisper. "Where am I?" "You're safe," he said softly. "You're in the hospital." Her lashes fluttered open, revealing her ocean blue eyes. confused, fragile, searching. She blinked at him, trying to focus. Who? Who are you? He hesitated for a fraction of a second, then said, Adrian. The name rolled off his tongue like thunder and calm rain at once. Recognition flickered. Not from memory, but from instinct. She remembered his voice from the storm. You, she breathed. You found me. I did, he said quietly. She looked around, her mind foggy. The doctors, they said you're my... She trailed off, uncertain. Adrian's lips curved into a faint, almost unreadable smile. They said what I told them. Her heart pounded faintly. Why? She whispered. Why did you call me your wife? He leaned closer, his shadow falling across her face. For a moment, his eyes, deep and unreadable, softened with a warmth that almost frightened her. Because, he said slowly, his tone a blend of mystery and promise, you deserve someone who will never let you fall again. Emily stared at him, her lips trembling as she tried to process his words. Before she could speak, Adrian's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. His expression changed instantly, his eyes darkening. Without a word, he stood up and walked to the window, his jaw tight. Outside, black cars lined the street. Trouble had found him again. And Emily, still weak in bed, whispered softly, Who are you really, Adrian Knight? The storm had passed, leaving the city washed clean beneath a pale morning sky. The roads shimmered with rainwater, and the hospital smelled faintly of disinfectant and sunlight. Emily sat upright for the first time in days, her body still weak but her mind clearer than before. Outside her window, a sleek black car waited. Inside the room, Adrian stood in his dark suit, silent as always, his expression unreadable. The moment he caught her gaze, he said quietly, It's time to leave this place. Emily hesitated. She wasn't sure if it was fear or trust that made her heart race. Leave, but You're not safe here, Adrian interrupted, his tone gentle but final. I'll take care of you. His words were not a request, they were a promise. He extended a hand toward her. For a brief second, she stared at it, unsure whether to take it. Then slowly, she placed her trembling fingers in his. His touch was warm, grounding, and strangely reassuring. They left the hospital through a private exit. His men, dressed in black, opened the car doors without a word. Emily sank into the soft leather seat, glancing out at the city she no longer recognized. As the car moved through winding streets, she felt the silence between them, heavy but not hostile. Adrian's presence filled the space, commanding yet calm. She finally asked, Who are you really? He glanced at her briefly, then back to the road. Someone who doesn't like seeing innocent people hurt. The car turned into a long driveway bordered by towering iron gates. Beyond them stood a mansion unlike any she'd ever seen, grand, silent, and guarded by shadows. When the doors opened, she stepped out hesitantly. The marble floor gleamed beneath her feet. Everything was beautiful, but it wasn't comforting. It was power disguised as elegance. Adrian's men disappeared into the background, leaving only the two of them. He gestured toward a long hallway. You'll rest here. You don't have to fear anyone in this house. Emily looked up at him. Not even you? She asked softly. His lips curved slightly, though his eyes remained serious. Especially not me. She followed him into the dining hall, a space vast enough to swallow silence whole. Chandelier glowed above the long table, where two places were set. Dinner had already been prepared, warm bread, roasted vegetables, and a simple dish of pasta. It surprised her. Not the food, but its simplicity. For a man of power, he didn't seem to care about extravagance. He took the seat across from her. For a while, neither spoke. The clinking of cutlery was the only sound between them. Then Adrian's voice broke the silence. You said someone hurt you. Emily froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. His gaze softened. You don't have to tell me, he said. But I can't help you unless I understand what happened. Her heart twisted. The images she'd been trying to bury, Lucas's betrayal, The nights of fear, the bitter taste of poisoned coffee, came flooding back. I, she began, her voice trembling. I don't even know where to start. Start with the truth, Adrian said quietly. She set her fork down, her hands shaking. My husband, Lucas White. He said he loved me, promised me everything. And then, her words broke, tears spilling before she could stop them. He changed. He wanted to use me, control me. When I refused, he locked me away. I thought he would kill me. Adrian didn't move, but his jaw tightened. The light in his eyes shifted, from calm to something dangerous. She went on, each word a struggle. He drugged me. I don't remember everything. But when I woke up, her voice cracked. I wasn't the same. He took everything from me, my dignity, my hope, my love for life. Silence fell like a blade. Emily looked away, ashamed of the tears on her face. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said so much. Adrian leaned forward slightly. Never apologize for surviving. She met his eyes, startled by the intensity in them. There was no pity there, only fire. He pushed his chair back slowly, the legs scraping against the marble floor. The room seemed to shrink around him. Lucas White, he said, the name rolling off his tongue like poison. Is that the man who destroyed you? Emily nodded weakly. Adrian's fingers curled into fists. His voice lowered, a growl beneath the calm. What about his partners, the ones he called his friends? She hesitated, her lips trembling. They were part of it. They laughed. I heard them. For a moment, the entire mansion went silent. Even the ticking clock seemed to stop. Adrian's calm, collected mask began to crack. He stood, his hand gripping the edge of the table so hard the wood groaned under his strength. Emily watched him, frightened not of him, but of the power that radiated from him. His voice came out low, filled with restrained fury. He'll pay for what he did. She tried to speak, to tell him not to get involved, but the look in his eyes silenced her. Adrian stepped closer to her, his expression dark, his tone trembling with controlled rage. Every man who touched your soul with pain will beg for mercy. His hand loosened from the table, but the imprint of his grip remained on the polished wood. Emily's heart raced. She didn't know what scared her more, Lucas's cruelty or Adrian's promise of vengeance. As Adrian turned away, one of his men entered quietly, whispering something in his ear. His expression hardened even more. Without a word, he reached for his coat and gun. Emily rose from her chair, her voice shaking. Adrian, where are you going? He paused at the doorway, his shadow stretching across the marble floor. To make sure your past never haunts you again, he said, and vanished into the night. The heavy mansion doors shut behind Adrian, the echo of his footsteps fading into the wet night. The sky was bruised with thunderclouds again, as if the heavens themselves shared his rage. His coat whipped in the wind, rain pelting against his face, but he didn't flinch. His mind was a storm far worse than the one above. Inside, Emily stood frozen in the dining hall. The candles still flickered on the table, untouched plates of food now growing cold, and her heart pounded. She could still hear his last words echoing in her mind, to make sure your past never haunts you again. She didn't know what that meant exactly, but her chest tightened with dread. She rushed to the window and pressed her trembling fingers against the cold glass. Through the mist, she caught a glimpse of his black car roaring down the driveway, tires hissing on wet stone. Then he was gone. Her knees weakened. She sank into the nearest chair, holding her arms around herself as though she could protect her heart from whatever was about to happen. Adrian had been her savior, but what if he was about to become a monster too? In the silence of the mansion, every sound felt louder: the ticking clock, the whisper of the rain, the faint rustle of the curtains. Emily's mind raced back to Lucas, to the laughter that once filled their home, and then the cruel voice that broke her soul. She whispered to the empty air, "Please, Adrian, don't do something you'll regret." But miles away, regret was not something Adrian knew. The city shimmered beneath the rain as he drove through narrow streets, his eyes fixed ahead, his thoughts dark and sharp. The man beside him, one of his most trusted guards, said cautiously, "Boss, we found Lucas. He's at his club downtown. He's surrounded by men." Adrian's jaw clenched. Good. Then he'll know what fear tastes like. The car slid to a stop in front of a building pulsing with music and neon lights. Adrian stepped out, ignoring the rain soaking his clothes. His presence alone made the doorman step back without question. His men followed in silence, shadows in motion. Inside, laughter and music filled the air. Glasses clinked and people danced, unaware that death had just entered the room. Lucas sat at a table near the bar, surrounded by expensive suits and cheap smiles. His arrogance was untouched, his cruelty hidden beneath charm. But when he looked up and saw Adrian walking toward him, his smile faltered. "Adrian Knight," he said, forcing a smirk. "I didn't expect to see you in a place like this." Adrian didn't answer. He stopped just a few feet away, eyes cold as steel. The noise in the club seemed to fade. "You heard a woman named Emily," Adrian said quietly. "You know who I mean." Lucas laughed, though his voice cracked slightly. "Oh, her. She was fun while she lasted. Pretty thing, but too soft. I gave her everything." Before he could finish, Adrian's fist connected with his jaw. The sound was sharp, cutting through. The night was thick with tension, the kind that breathes before chaos erupts. Adrian's black car skidded to a halt outside an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Lucas's hideout. His men, loyal shadows in the dark, followed silently, weapons drawn and eyes sharp. The air was electric, filled with the promise of vengeance. Adrian stepped out, his long coat swaying in the cold wind, the moonlight catching the silver of his gun. This wasn't business tonight. It was personal. He entered the building like a storm, silent, controlled, but deadly. His footsteps echoed against the steel floors, each one a countdown to reckoning. Emily's trembling voice still haunted his mind. The betrayal, the drugging, the fear. Every word she had spoken fueled the fire in his veins. This wasn't just revenge. This was redemption, written in gunpowder and blood. The first bullet shattered the silence. A flash of light, a scream, and chaos erupted. Gunfire exploded from the shadows as Lucas's guards opened fire. Adrian's men returned it, moving like phantoms through the smoke. Bullets tore through the walls, glass rained down from above, and the smell of metal filled the air. Adrian moved forward, calm amid the storm, his focus unshakable. He ducked behind a pillar, fired twice. 2 men dropped instantly. The others hesitated, terrified by the precision in his eyes. He wasn't aiming to survive. He was aiming to finish. One of Lucas's men charged at him with a knife. Adrian caught his wrist midair, twisted it, and the blade clattered to the ground. He slammed the man into the wall, his voice low and cold. "Where is he?" The guard barely had time to answer before a single gunshot silenced him. Upstairs, Lucas watched from the shadows, panic flickering beneath his arrogance. He hadn't expected Adrian to come this far, or to bring hell with him. He turned to escape, but the echo of approaching footsteps made him freeze. Adrian appeared at the top of the stairs, his gun steady, his expression carved from stone. "Running again, Lucas?" he said, voice laced with venom. "You always run from the things you break." Lucas smirked, masking fear with mockery. "She was mine, Adrian. You think saving her makes you a hero? She came to me willingly. You're just the cleanup crew." Adrian's jaw tightened. He stepped closer, gun lowering as his fists clenched. "You never knew what love meant," he growled, his voice trembling with rage and pain. "You used her. You broke her. And you call that love?" Lucas laughed, a hollow, cruel sound that echoed against the metal walls. "You think she'll ever love a man like you? A criminal? A killer?" The punch came before the words even finished. Adrian's fist connected with Lucas's jaw, sending him sprawling backward. Blood splattered across the floor. Lucas scrambled up, grabbed a pipe, and swung, but Adrian blocked it, twisting his arm until the pipe clanged to the ground. The 2 men crashed against the rooftop door, bursting out into the freezing night. Rain began to fall, soaking them both as thunder rolled above. The city lights shimmered below, cold witnesses to their war. Lucas swung again, wild with desperation. Adrian countered, his movements sharp and precise. Another hit. Lucas stumbled backward, slipping near the ledge. His breath came ragged, his pride shattered. Adieu. Rian's chest heaved, his eyes burning. You had everything, he said quietly, voice breaking. And you destroyed her. Why? Lucas smirked weakly, blood staining his lips. Because I could. That was the last straw. Adrian lunged forward, slamming him to the ground. He pinned him there, his gun aimed at Lucas's chest. You deserve to die for what you did, Adrian hissed. Lucas looked up, unafraid now, resigned. Then do it. Kill me. Prove you're just like me. For a long moment, only the rain spoke. Adrian's finger trembled on the trigger. Every part of him screamed to end it, to silence the monster forever. But something stopped him. Emily's voice echoed in his mind, soft, trembling. Don't let hate destroy what's left of you. Adrian exhaled sharply, lowering the gun. No, he said finally, standing over Lucas. You'll live knowing she's free from you forever. That's worse than death. Lucas fell to his knees, defeated and broken. The rain washed over him, as if cleansing the sins he'd never repent for. Adrian turned and walked away, his shadow disappearing into the night. Downstairs, his men were silent, bloodied but victorious. The war was over, or so it seemed. Adrian climbed into his car, exhaustion carving lines across his face. His mind wasn't on victory, though. It was on Emily. Her fragile smile, her trembling hands, her haunted eyes. He wanted to go home, to tell her it was done, that she was safe now. When he entered the mansion, the quiet felt wrong. Too heavy, too still. The fire in the hearth was dying, its glow faint and flickering. He called her name softly. No answer. His steps quickened, heart pounding harder with each echo down the hall. Then he saw it. A folded note lay on the dining table, her handwriting delicate and trembling. He reached for it, his hands shaking as he opened the paper. Don't look for me. You deserve peace, too. The words hit him harder than any bullet. For the first time in years, Adrian Knight, the feared Mafia boss, felt powerless. His hand dropped the note, his eyes burned. The room felt emptier than it ever had before. The woman he had saved, the woman who had unknowingly saved him too, was gone. Adrian's grip tightened on the note as the wind howled through the open window. The rain outside poured harder, echoing his heartbeat. For the first time, the man who feared nothing whispered into the darkness, Emily, where did you go? The days had turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, yet Adrian still found himself waking to the sound of her voice in his dreams. Every night, he replayed the moment he found that note. Don't look for me. You deserve peace, too. Peace. He had tried to find it in the silence of his mansion, in the rhythm of the rain tapping against his windows, in the endless smoke curling from his late-night cigars. But peace never came. It wasn't something you found. It was something someone gave you, and she had taken it with her when she left. Adrian Knight, the man once feared by every rival and respected by every ally, now felt like a ghost in his own empire. He stopped attending meetings. He ignored the calls from his men. His world of power and dominance faded into gray. He wasn't the same mafia boss who had painted the city with vengeance. Something inside him had changed the night she disappeared. And yet, life continued. The city went on, unaware that its most dangerous man was learning what loneliness truly meant. One evening, after another sleepless night, Adrian drove aimlessly down the coastal road. The sky was bruised purple, waves crashing against the shore with the restless energy of the storm within him. He had driven this path countless times, maybe hoping foolishly that fate would bring her back to him. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the sea, something caught his attention. A small coffee shop stood at the edge of the beach, Seaside Brew, quiet, tucked away from the chaos of the city. It reminded him of something warm. He parked his car and stepped out, the salty wind brushing against his face. The faint aroma of freshly ground coffee drifted through the air, carrying With it, a memory that stabbed his chest, her laughter behind the counter, her golden hair, her soft voice asking, "Cream or black?" He pushed open the door. The bell above chimed gently, and then he saw her. Emily. She was behind the counter, her golden hair tied up loosely, strands falling across her face as she worked. She wore a simple white apron, her hands moving gracefully as she poured coffee for an elderly couple. Her smile was faint, fragile, but real, like a sunrise after a long storm. Adrian froze. For the first time in months, he couldn't move. His throat tightened, and all the words he'd rehearsed in his head vanished. She hadn't seen him yet. She turned, wiping her hands on her apron, and the moment her eyes met his, everything stopped. Her breath hitched. The cup in her hand trembled slightly. Adrian stepped forward slowly, as if afraid that one wrong move might shatter the moment. The world outside disappeared. It was just the two of them, standing in the quiet hum of the little seaside cafe. "Adrian," she whispered, disbelief softening her voice. He nodded once, his voice low and steady. "It's been a while." Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things. Pain, longing, forgiveness. The sound of the waves filled the gap where words couldn't. "You found me," she said finally, almost in a whisper. He gave a faint, bittersweet smile. "No," he replied quietly. "I just never stopped looking." Her eyes glistened. She looked away, brushing a tear from her cheek. The ocean breeze slipped through the open window, stirring the scent of salt and roasted coffee beans. It felt like a memory reborn. Adrian stepped closer, his gaze soft but unreadable. "You built your world again," he said, voice deep with admiration. "Without fear." Emily smiled faintly, glancing at the customers who had now left. "Fear doesn't disappear," she said, softly. "You just learn to live above it." There was strength in her now, the kind born not from comfort, but from surviving the unbearable. She looked different, yet more herself than ever. Adrian's eyes lowered briefly, and then he noticed the faint curve of her stomach. He froze. His breath caught in his throat. She saw the realization in his eyes and turned slightly, her hands instinctively brushing over her belly. "It's his," she said softly, not needing to explain further. Adrian said nothing for a long time. His jaw tightened, but there was no anger, only a deep ache in his chest. Then finally, he exhaled slowly. "It doesn't change who you are," he murmured. "It doesn't change what you deserve." Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time they were mixed with gratitude. "I didn't expect kindness," she whispered. "You deserve peace," Adrian said gently. "The kind you tried to give me." The cafe was empty now. The sunset spilled through the window, bathing them both in gold. The air between them was thick with words they hadn't yet spoken. Apologies, promises, and the quiet pull of something that refused to die. Emily wiped her hands again, more to steady herself than to clean them. "I thought I'd never see you again," she said. "After everything, I thought you'd hate me for leaving." "Hate you?" Adrian repeated, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "No, I hated myself for not stopping you." For a long moment, neither moved. The hum of the coffee machine filled the silence. Adrian's eyes softened as he watched her, the woman who had survived the cruelty of love, the woman who had taught him mercy. Then, finally, she looked up at him again, her voice trembling but clear. "Do you still mean it?" she began, the words catching in her throat. "When you said I'm your wife?" The world seemed to stop. The waves outside crashed louder as if echoing. Her question. Adrian's heart pounded, his breath shallow. He stepped closer, close enough to see the shimmer of tears in her ocean-blue eyes, close enough to feel the warmth of her presence that had haunted him for months. Adrian's voice was low, almost a whisper, as his hand brushed the counter between them. "If I said yes," he murmured, eyes locked on hers, "would you let me prove it this time?" The question still lingered between them, trembling in the air like the final note of a love song. "If I said yes," Adrian had whispered, Would you let me prove it this time? Emily's lips parted, her breath catching as the world around them softened into silence. The waves outside kissed the shore gently, and the scent of roasted coffee wrapped them in warmth. For a long moment, neither moved. Words seemed too fragile for what lived between them. Finally, Emily's eyes dropped to her hands. "You've already proven more than anyone ever did," she said softly. Adrian took a slow breath, his chest rising and falling with something heavier than air, something that felt like release. He wanted to hold her, to tell her that the months of emptiness had been worth it just to stand here again. But he didn't rush. He had learned that real love had its own pace. Over the following weeks, Adrian became a quiet visitor at the cafe. He didn't bring flowers or gifts, just himself, and a silence that never demanded more than she could give. He'd sit in his usual corner, nursing a black coffee, his eyes occasionally meeting hers across the room. Each glance felt like a conversation, one about trust, healing, and second chances. The customers began to notice too. The woman with the golden hair had a light in her eyes again, and the tall man who used to look like a storm now looked like sunrise. Emily's pregnancy bloomed gently, a visible promise of resilience. Adrian never asked questions about the past. He simply stayed close enough to protect, far enough to let her breathe. He wasn't her savior anymore. He was her choice. One evening, after closing the shop, Emily found him, fixing the broken door hinge at the entrance. He wasn't dressed like a mafia boss anymore. Gone were the tailored suits and the heavy air of command. He wore a simple black shirt, sleeves rolled up, hands calloused from doing real work. "You don't have to do that," she said with a soft laugh. He looked up, smiling faintly. "I do," he replied. "If I'm going to spend every evening here, it might as well look right." Her laughter filled the air, a sound he hadn't realized he missed so much. Later that night, as the stars painted the sky, Adrian stood outside the cafe alone. He looked out at the sea and felt the weight of years lifting off him. He had made his choice. The empire, the guns, the power. None of it meant anything anymore. The next morning, he called his men together for the last time. The warehouse, once the heart of his empire, was quiet now. The men stood in silence as Adrian placed a sealed envelope on the table. Inside were legal documents, the final act of a man letting go. He had sold his properties, shut down his operations, and transferred most of his wealth to orphanages and shelters across the city. "This life gave me power," he said quietly, looking at them one by one. "But it also took everything that mattered. Don't let it take more." Some of the men looked away, eyes glistening with emotion. The legend of Adrian Knight, the mafia boss who ruled the city's underworld, was ending not with a gunshot, but with peace. When he walked away from that place, the weight that had chained his soul for years finally fell. Days turned into weeks, and the city began to forget the name that once made it tremble. But for Emily, the name Adrian Knight meant something entirely different now. Not fear, not power, but safety. One evening, as the sky melted into gold and rose over the sea, Adrian walked into Seaside Brew again. The cafe was quiet, or than usual, the air filled with the smell of vanilla and rain. Emily stood behind the counter, her apron dusted with flour, her cheeks glowing with the warmth of the evening. He walked up to her, slowly, each step carrying a promise. She smiled when she saw him. "You're late today," she teased gently. He nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "I had something to finish," he said softly. Before she could ask, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He didn't kneel like a man rehearsing a perfect moment. He simply sank down before her, humbly, his heart laid bare. When he opened the box, the ring inside wasn't grand or jeweled. It was simple, elegant, a silver band with a single tiny sapphire that caught the light like her eyes. "Not as a boss," Adrian said quietly, his voice trembling just enough to show the truth behind it. "Not as a savior, just as a man who finally learned to love right." Tears filled her eyes instantly. Her hands covered her mouth as she shook her head in disbelief. "Adrian," she whispered, her voice breaking. He looked up at her, his eyes full of hope and redemption. You taught me what love really is. So if you'll still have me, I want to build a life, not an empire, with you." Emily couldn't speak. She simply nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. Then she bent down, taking his face in her hands, and kissed his forehead. A gentle, trembling kiss that felt like a vow. They married a month later in a small ceremony by the sea. No crowds, no luxury, just them, a few close friends, and the sound of waves. Emily wore a simple white dress that fluttered in the breeze, and Adrian, in a linen shirt, looked at her as though seeing sunlight for the first time. When the officiant asked if he took her as his wife, Adrian's answer came steady and clear. "Always." And when Emily said, "I do," her voice carried through the air like music, blending with the sound of the sea that had witnessed both their storms and their peace. Afterward, they stood by the shore, barefoot, watching the sun dip beneath the horizon. Adrian held her close, his hand resting protectively over her growing belly. He wasn't just a husband now. He was a father in waiting, a guardian reborn. He would raise her child as his own, love without boundaries, protect without condition. The ghosts of his past no longer haunted him. They had been replaced by laughter, warmth, and the quiet rhythm of family life. Every evening they'd close the cafe together, lock the doors, and walk along the beach, her hand in his heart lighter with every step. The world no longer feared Adrian Knight. It didn't need to, because he no longer ruled by power. He ruled by love. As the sky burned orange and gold, Emily leaned against him, her voice soft as a prayer. "You carried me when I was broken," she whispered. "Now we walk together." Adrian looked down at her, his hand brushing a strand of hair from her face, a smile tugging at his lips. And as the waves kissed their feet, the man who once ruled through fear finally bowed to the only thing stronger, love.